The Rockcastle River crested at 11:47 p.m. on Halloween night, 6 feet above flood stage and still climbing. 22-year-old Silas Kendall had 40 minutes before the low field behind the old tobacco barn disappeared under 6 feet of black water, and he was already standing in the middle of it with nowhere left to run. Then his boot punched through a rotted floorboard, and his hand found a cold metal handle bolted to a rafter in the dark. What Silas pulled out of those rafters didn't just save his life. It pulled the floor out from under the woman who put him there. Let me back up, because to understand what Silas found, you need to understand what Donna Kendall had spent 4 years doing to put him there. Randall Kendall, Big Randy to everyone in Harlan County, Kentucky, was the kind of man who fixed other people's fences without being asked, who kept a spare tire in his truck for strangers, who worked 200 acres of cattle land from the age of 14 until a brain aneurysm dropped him on a September morning while he was pouring his first cup of coffee. He was 53 years old, no warning, no symptoms. No goodbye one moment. He was standing at the kitchen counter. The next, he was gone. Silas, his only child from his first marriage, had driven 6 hours from community college in Knoxville the moment the hospital called. He had held his father's hand in the ICU while machines breathed for him. He had made the decision, alone, at 3:00 a.m., in a hallway that smelled like antiseptic and old carpet, to let him go when the doctors said there was no chance of recovery. He had stood at the grave in Harlan County Cemetery on a cold Tuesday in September and watched them lower the casket while exactly 11 people stood around him in the gray. One of those 11 was Donna Kendall. Donna Blackwell had married Randall 4 years ago, 18 months after Silas's mother passed. She was polished in the way of a woman who had been someone else's trophy wife and understood precisely how to present herself. She drove a clean white Lexus on gravel roads. Her nails were always done in quiet beige. She called Silas Sweetie, in a tone that made the word feel like the click of a door being locked from the other side. In the 6 weeks following the funeral, Donna had been efficient and businesslike in a way that raised every hair on the back of Silas's neck. She hired an estate attorney from Lexington, not from Harlan, not anyone who had known the family, and within 2 weeks had filed Randall's will with the county probate court. The will, dated 11 months ago, signed while Randall had been recovering from a hip replacement on a cocktail of pain medications, left everything to Donna. The farm, the cattle, the equipment, the house, the savings account, everything. Silas hadn't even known the will existed until the attorney mailed him a certified copy. When he drove to the farm to ask Donna about it, she met him at the screen door without opening it. "Your daddy loved you," she said, her voice smooth as creek water over flat stones. "But he wanted to make sure this farm stayed managed properly. You know you weren't in a position to handle it." "I'm his son," Silas said. "And I'm his wife." She smiled, just barely. "I've given you until the end of the month." "That's more than the law requires. I'd appreciate it if you had your things out by midnight on the 31st. Tonight was October 31st. At 10 p.m., Silas loaded the last of what fit into his truck. 3 boxes of clothes, his grandfather's hunting rifle, a plastic bin of old paperwork, and the framed photograph from his father's nightstand of a 10-year-old Silas sitting on Big Randy's shoulders at the county fair, both of them squinting into the sun and grinning. Then he tried to start the engine. The truck clicked once and went dead. He worked the flashlight over the battery terminals for 5 minutes before he understood what he was looking at. The corrosion was too fresh, too deliberate, the kind of damage that didn't happen naturally in a parked truck in a month. He stood in the driveway in a rain that had been building since sundown, looking at the house where he had grown up, where his father had grown up, where his grandfather had raised 7 kids on coal country wages and turned 200 acres of rough hill land into something worth keeping. Through the kitchen window, he could see Donna sitting at the table with a glass of wine and her phone, comfortable and patient, waiting for him to disappear. He started walking. The nearest town was 6 miles by road. Silas cut across the fields instead, following the tree line he had navigated since he was 8 years old. The rain came sideways, driven by a wind off the Cumberland Plateau that didn't blow so much as shove, and then he heard the river. The rock castle ran along the eastern edge of the Kendall property. Silas had grown up with that sound, knew it in October, knew it after rain, knew it in every season. The sound he was hearing now wasn't any of those. It was lower, continuous, hungry. He checked his phone. No signal. The cell tower on the ridge went down in serious storms, and then he saw the water. It came out of the low field like a slow grey tide, creeping through the grass without drama, indifferent and absolute. The rock castle had jumped its banks somewhere upstream, and the flat lower acres were going under. The road back to town was already gone. He could see the silver sheet of the culvert overflow from where he stood. He was trapped. His father's voice came to him without warning. If you're ever caught out in a flood on the low field, you get to the tobacco barn. That building has been through 4 floods and it's still standing. I don't care if the floor's rotten. Get to the roof and wait. Silas ran. The old tobacco barn sat on a slight rise at the far end of the property, hidden behind a windbreak of white oaks his grandfather had planted in 1962. Nobody had used it in 20 years. It was a tall, dark cathedral of hand-cut timber and rusted tin roofing, too solid to fall down and too weathered to fix, and Silas's father had always kept it padlocked and been strangely firm about one rule: don't go inside. Floor's rotten. You'll go right through. The padlock was hanging open in the hasp. Silas pulled the barn door and stepped into the dark. Old tobacco dust, the sweet rot of oak going slowly back to earth. He tested each step before trusting his weight found a solid center beam and stood on it, listening to the rain hammer the tin roof. Outside, the water was reaching the base of the rise. He had maybe 30 minutes before it came under the door. He swept his flashlight upward, looking for the loft ladder, and caught the glint of metal in the rafters. High up between 2 upright timbers, resting on a crossbeam, was a military green metal box, sealed with a rubber gasketed twist latch. A simple wire handle bolted through the lid, and tied to that handle with a strip of leather was a small handwritten tag. Silas's breath left him. He knew that handwriting. For Silas, when the time comes. He got up to the rafter on the 4th attempt, the rungs half-rotted, each step a prayer. He carried the box back down and sat on the center beam with the floodwater lapping at the barn walls and his hands shaking so badly he could barely work the latch. Inside, wrapped in 2 layers of heavy plastic sheeting, were a legal envelope, a small digital voice recorder, a USB drive, and a handwritten letter in his father's careful block print. Silas, I love you and I'm sorry. I put this here because it's the one place I know Donna won't look. She thinks this barn is worthless. She doesn't know what your grandfather left here for me, and I'm leaving it here for you. The will she filed is not my real will. She brought that attorney to the house while I was still on the OxyContin from my hip surgery, and I signed what he put in front of me. When I found out what it said, I made a new one. The real one is in the envelope. The land was always supposed to go to you. Your grandfather told me 100 times. The farm goes to the firstborn grandchild. I honored that. The recorder has something you'll need. I don't know if it's enough, but it's everything I have. I'm sorry I didn't fight harder while I still could. Dad. Silas read the letter 3 times. Then he opened the envelope. Inside was a will dated 14 months ago, 3 months after the one Donna had filed, prepared by an attorney named Edgar Pelham in Barberville, and witnessed by 2 neighbors Silas had known his entire life. Dave and Carol Sutter, who had lived on the county road for 30 years. Randall Kendall's estate, the farm, the cattle, the equipment, every acre, to pass entirely to his son, Silas Ray Kendall. The USB drive contained scanned bank records from a savings account in his father's name. Over $80,000 withdrawn in careful increments across 2 years, transferred to a personal account in Donna's name alone. The recorder held 11 minutes of audio. His father's voice, tired and deliberate, describing the day Donna brought the attorney to the house. Describing what he believed he had signed. Describing his fear that he was too sick and too alone to fight it. "I just want Silas to have the farm," his father said near the end, his voice fraying at the edges. "That's all I want. The farm stays in the family." Silas pressed the box against his chest and closed his eyes. He had spent 6 weeks feeling like everything his father built was being quietly buried. He hadn't known it was buried right here, in the one place he was never supposed to go, waiting for exactly this night. He sealed the box, got to his feet, and started finding his way out. It took 2 hours. He crossed a cattle fence hand over hand, waded a stretch of waist-deep water, using a fence post as a staff, and finally pulled himself up onto the county road near the old grain elevator, soaked through and shaking and completely clear-headed. He walked 2 miles toward the only lit window he could see, a farmhouse with a lamp burning in the front room and a truck in the drive. He knocked at 1:15 in the morning. Frances Pelham, 71 years old, had spent 22 years as the Harlan County Register of Deeds before she retired. She was Dave Sutter's older sister. She had known Randall Kendall for 40 years and Silas since the day he was born. She opened the door, looked at him standing on her porch soaking wet with a metal box under his arm, and said, "Get in here. I'll put the kettle on." He told her everything. She read every page with her glasses on the end of her nose, her expression shifting from careful neutrality to something sharp and fixed. "Donna hired Whitmore Realty out of London," Frances said when she finished. "Word got around she's selling the farm to Crestline Development. They're buying up cattle land all over the county." She looked at her watch. It was 2:40 in the morning. "Signings at 10 o'clock this morning at the courthouse. Deed transfer goes through the Register of Deeds office." She set down the will and looked at him steady. "I still know every person who works that office." She picked up her phone. At 9:52 a.m., Silas walked through the glass doors of the Harlan County Courthouse with Frances at his side, and Edgar Pelham, reached by phone at 3 a.m., and driving from Barberville since 4, one step behind. Donna was already at the counter on the 2nd floor, charcoal blazer, a Crestline Development representative beside her, a stack of papers waiting. She looked up when Silas came through the door. Her face moved through 3 expressions in under a second. Surprise, contempt, then something that might have been fear carefully tucking itself away. "You need to leave," she said. "This is a private transaction." "It is," Silas agreed. He set the metal box on the counter next to her papers. "And you're about to transfer property you don't legally own." Edgar Pelham placed a certified copy of the second will on the counter, a notarized statement from Dave and Carol Sutter, the original will in Frances's hands. "This document supersedes what was filed in probate," Pelham said, his voice quiet and factual. "Executed in sound mind, properly witnessed. We file the motion to reopen this afternoon." The Crestline representative had stopped moving. He was reading over Pelham's shoulder. The county register had stepped back from the counter and picked up the phone. "Randall wasn't thinking clearly when he signed that," Donna said. Her voice was still controlled, but the blazer suddenly looked like a costume she'd put on for a role that was ending. He was confused, "We have 11 minutes of him thinking very clearly," Silas said. The room went quiet enough to hear the fluorescent light buzzing. The Crestline representative gathered his copies of the proposed deed transfer and slid them into his briefcase without a word. He did not look at Donna. He left. State police arrived at 10:34, with an investigator from the Kentucky Attorney General's Elder Financial Abuse Unit who had been contacted by Pelham before dawn. The bank records on the USB drive documented $83,000 in unauthorized transfers. The audio recording documented undue influence during the signing of the first will. Donna Blackwell Kendall was walked out of the Harlan County Courthouse in handcuffs, her beige nails folded in front of her, the white Lexus sitting in the parking lot with nowhere left to go. The probate case was reopened. It took 4 months. Courts move deliberately in Harlan County, but they move decisively when the evidence is this clean. The farm, the cattle, the equipment, the house, the savings account less $83,000 that Donna was eventually ordered to repay. All of it passed to Silas Ray Kendall. His first act was to drive back to the farm on a cold February morning and walk through the house where his father had lived and his grandfather before him. He stood in the kitchen, the half-finished crossword still on the table where his father had left it. He sat down at that table and cried for a long time. Then he made coffee and called Dave and Carol Sutter to say thank you. Silas kept the working farm. It still runs today. He kept the cattle and hired 2 local men who needed the work. He sold 12 acres of the southern corner, the flat piece that flooded every season anyway, at fair market value, and used that money to buy a shuttered motel on the edge of Harlan proper. He spent 8 months gutting and rebuilding it room by room. He called it the Randall House. It operates today as a transitional shelter for young men aging out of the foster care system in southeastern Kentucky. The ones who turn 18 with a garbage bag of their belongings and no place to land. Short-term housing, job training, a network of county resources and local employers who've agreed to give a first interview to anyone who comes through the door. There is one rule, written in Silas's own hand and printed on a sign above the front entrance. Nobody leaves here without a plan. Silas Kendall went into a flooding field on Halloween night with nothing but a dead truck and a broken heart. He came back out carrying a metal box his father had nailed to a rafter in the dark years before, in the one place he knew Donna would never look, waiting for exactly the son who would know what to do with it. Buried truths don't disappear. They wait for the right flood to move the debris. They wait for the right person to climb the right rafter at exactly the right moment of desperation. They find their way to the surface, and when they do, everything built on top of the lie comes down with it. If Silas's story hit you somewhere real, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Hit that like button and subscribe to Own the Drama, because we have more stories just like this one, and we're not done yet.